It started with a storm. Rain fell in thick sheets over the wildlife sanctuary nestled deep within the hills of southern India. Lightning split the sky, followed by deafening cracks of thunder that shook the glass windows of the main building. Inside, Dr. Meera Singh, a seasoned wildlife veterinarian, paced back and forth with her radio pressed tight against her ear. "3 cubs!" the voice crackled over the storm. "The mother didn't make it. We need help. Fast!" Within the hour, a rescue team arrived at the sanctuary gates carrying a soaked burlap crate. Inside were 3 tiger cubs, newborns, blind, shivering, and crying. Their mother, a critically injured tigress, had been shot by poachers hours earlier and succumbed to her wounds before she could even feed them once. They were orphans. And they were dying. Dr. Meera moved quickly. She prepared bottles with specialized milk formula, wrapped the cubs in warm towels, and settled them under heat lamps. But by morning, the weakest of the 3 had stopped crying. He simply lay still, breathing shallowly. The others weren't far behind. Their tiny bodies needed warmth, nourishment, and, most critically, touch. Not just from human hands, but from something that felt like a mother. That's when Meera looked out the glass door and saw her. Layla? A 6-year-old golden-coated Labrador retriever lying calmly on the porch despite the noise of the storm. She had been raised at the sanctuary since she was a pup, trained as a helper for injured animals and used to comfort recovering wildlife. She had the gentlest eyes and the soul of a nurturer. Meera hesitated. It sounded crazy. No one had ever tried this before, pairing a domestic dog with newborn tigers. But time was slipping away and the cubs were fading. With trembling hands, Meera opened the nursery gate and softly called Layla inside. The Labrador sniffed the air, slowly walked to the heat lamp, and tilted her head. Then, without any command, she gently curled herself around the cubs, one paw protectively draped across the smallest one. Meera watched in stunned silence as the cubs instinctively crawled toward the dog's warm belly and nestled against her fur. They stopped crying. They slept, and from that moment on they never left her side. Layla adopted them as her own, licking their faces clean, nudging them to eat, even barking softly if one of them wandered too far from her warmth. The sanctuary staff couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Cameras were installed to monitor them overnight, but they always showed the same thing: 3 striped babies cuddled against golden fur, and a mother who never asked questions. Weeks passed, then months. The cubs grew quickly, stronger, bigger, wilder, but they still followed Layla everywhere. She taught them to play, to chase, and to wrestle gently. They didn't seem to know they were tigers. And perhaps she didn't care. To the world outside, it became a sensation. Dog raises tigers made headlines from Delhi to New York. Visitors came from all over to see the strange but beautiful family. And every time they approached the enclosure, they'd see the same thing: a Labrador with calm, kind eyes and 3 young tigers draped over her like children on their mother. But nothing lasts forever. As the cubs approached their first year, the sanctuary team began to discuss what came next. The tigers, now weighing over 100 pounds each, couldn't stay with Layla much longer. Their instincts would soon overpower their memories. And a domestic dog, no matter how nurturing, couldn't be their lifelong companion. The inevitable separation loomed ahead like a storm cloud. Meera postponed the decision as long as she could, watching Layla sleep with one paw over her growing sons. But she knew, any day now, nature would take over. And what would happen then? What no one knew was that the bond between Layla and the cubs went far deeper than any rule book could explain. And years later, that bond would be tested in the most unthinkable way. By the time the cubs turned 18 months old, everything had changed. They were no longer little bundles of stripes trailing behind Layla like ducklings. Now they towered over her, lean muscle rippling under golden-orange fur, their paws the size of dinner plates. The sanctuary had stopped allowing visitors near them months ago. "Too dangerous," Mira said. Their instincts were beginning to show: stalking behavior, low growls, bursts of aggression during feeding time. They were, after all, wild animals, and wild animals do not stay tame forever. Still, Layla never seemed afraid. Even when the largest of the cubs, named Kavi, let out a deep growl during a feeding session, Layla simply stood her ground, her calm brown eyes meeting his. He stopped, tilted his head, and backed off. To the sanctuary staff it was baffling. Even the most seasoned handlers wore protective gear near the cubs now. But Layla? She walked into the enclosure without hesitation, no leash, no commands. She was more than a presence. She was still their mother. But Mira knew they were on borrowed time. The sanctuary had been working with a reserve in central India, preparing the cubs for reintroduction into a protected wild habitat. A team of behaviorists had been tracking their readiness for months. Hunting simulations, isolation drills, reducing human contact, all necessary, all painful. And then came the day Mira had been dreading. "We'll transfer them in 2 weeks," said Dr. Patel, the field director from the reserve. "They've passed all evaluations. It's time." Mira hung up the phone with a pit in her stomach. How would Layla understand this? How do you explain to a mother that her children, the ones she raised from blind, helpless creatures, were being taken away forever? The next morning, Mira took Layla for her usual walk along the forest edge. The Labrador moved slower now, her hips showing signs of age. She paused, sniffing the air, as if she sensed something was off. Mira knelt beside her and whispered, "They're leaving soon, girl." Layla didn't react. She simply sat, looking out toward the trees where her tiger sons usually played. That evening, the team began preparing the sedation kits and transport crates. They kept it quiet, but the energy in the sanctuary shifted. Even the birds seemed to sing more cautiously that day. 2 nights before the transfer, something unexpected happened. A sharp screech cut through the stillness of dusk. It came from the tiger enclosure. The team rushed out, flashlights scanning the perimeter, fearing the worst. But what they found stopped them in their tracks. The largest tiger, Kavi, was pacing frantically, pawing at the gate, letting out panicked roars. The other 2 crouched low, their bodies tense, ears back. Inside the enclosure, Layla was missing. And so was the lock on the secondary gate. Panic surged through the team. Had she escaped? Had someone let her out? Mira's heart pounded as she ran toward the outer fence. Then she froze. Just beyond the edge of the forest trail, barely visible in the shadows, stood the silhouette of Layla. She was staring at the trees, at something or someone. The 3 tigers stood behind her in complete silence. And that's when Mira saw it. A pair of yellow eyes blinking slowly from the brush. Another tiger. A wild one. The staff held their breath. A confrontation could be fatal. A territorial male meeting other males. Disaster. But then, before anyone could react, Layla stepped forward, not barking, not growling, but calmly, slowly, as if she were protecting her sons. The wild tiger sniffed the air, took a step forward, and then stopped. A low growl rumbled in its chest, but it didn't charge. It stared, then turned and vanished back into the trees. The sanctuary team stood in silence. Layla turned to her tigers, her tail wagging faintly. The tension shattered, but Mira couldn't shake the feeling. Layla hadn't just walked into the forest. She had walked into the space between instinct and love. And what happened that night would be just the beginning. The morning after Layla's encounter with the wild tiger, everything was different. Kavi, Rudra, and Tanu, once rowdy, unpredictable young predators, now moved with an eerie calm. They hovered around Layla, pressing their massive heads against her neck, nuzzling her as if they were still cubs. Layla, in turn, remained unusually still, her eyes distant. Something had shifted. Mira noticed the change instantly. The tigers had always been wild, yes, but there was always a glimmer of domestic familiarity in how they responded to her, or at least to the staff who raised them. But that morning, they no longer looked at humans the same way. They only looked at Layla. Later that afternoon, during a final behavioral check before the scheduled transfer, Dr. Patel arrived with a clipboard and 2 assistants. They observed the tigers for signs of aggression or agitation. Instead, they found something else, a pattern. Kavi would not eat unless Layla approached his food bowl first. Tanu growled at one of the male staffers who came too close to her. Rudra lay curled up beside Layla's feet, his breath slow and steady like a child asleep near his mother. These were not just animals raised by a dog. They were bonded, a kind of bond that defied science. "We can't send them off like this," one of the assistants whispered. "They're not ready." But Dr. Patel shook his head. "They'll never be ready in the way you think. In the wild, they'll have to learn independence. That's the point. We raised them for this." "But they don't know how to be without her," Mira replied, her voice tight. "She's their anchor." Dr. Patel didn't respond. His eyes lingered on Layla, who lay on the ground, tail swishing lazily as Kavi cleaned her ears with his rough tongue. It was an absurd sight, a 400-pound tiger tending to an aging Labrador like a pup tending to its mother. That night, a storm rolled in. Thick clouds blanketed the sanctuary, and the wind howled through the high trees. Rain lashed against the rooftops. Most of the staff took shelter indoors, but Mira didn't sleep. Something in her gut told her to check on Layla. Pulling a raincoat over her shoulders, she made her way toward the tiger enclosure. Her flashlight beam cut through the fog, catching glints of reflective eyes. And then she froze. The gate to the outer fence was open, wide open. She ran. The enclosure was empty, no tigers. No Layla, only muddy paw prints, leading into the forest. Her breath caught in her throat. This couldn't be happening. She called in backup, and soon a small search team formed, their flashlights bouncing across the undergrowth as they followed the trail. The tracks were erratic, scattered, deep, layered with panic. Something had startled them, but what? A flash of movement up ahead made Mira pause. Then a sound. A low, rumbling growl, followed by the sharp yip of a dog. She broke into a sprint. The team emerged into a clearing, and what they saw stopped them cold. Layla stood at the center, her fur soaked through, flanked on all sides by the tigers. But they weren't alone. Just meters away, 2 poachers lay sprawled on the ground, rifles knocked aside, eyes wide with fear. One of them was whimpering. The other, bleeding from a claw mark across his arm, was too stunned to speak. Behind them, a downed snare trap, rigged to capture a large predator. They had been waiting in the storm to capture one of the tigers. They didn't expect all 3, and they certainly didn't expect Layla. It was her barking, her charging, that alerted the tigers. Witnesses later said she launched herself at the trap just seconds before Kavi was about to step into it. That act startled the poachers, buying just enough time for the others to react. The tigers didn't kill them, but they didn't let them go either. They stood over them, growling in low, terrifying tones, protecting Layla with a force that felt primal. When Mira arrived, the tigers didn't move. They watched her. Then Layla padded forward and licked Mira's hand once and turned back toward her sons. That night, as the authorities cuffed the poachers and led them away, a wave of silent awe swept across the sanctuary. The news would spread fast. But for those who saw it firsthand, there was no need for headlines. They had witnessed something ancient, a bond born not of biology, but of choice, of love. And no one, not even nature itself, could deny that something extraordinary had happened. The morning after the storm, the sanctuary buzzed with whispers. News of what had happened in the forest had already reached the administration, the board of directors, and even local authorities. A story like that, a Labrador saving her tiger sons from poachers, wasn't just compelling, it was impossible, but it was true. The poachers had been apprehended and charged. The trap was confiscated. Yet what stayed with everyone wasn't the danger that had passed, it was the power of what they had witnessed. Mira sat beside Layla that morning, gently toweling off her still damp fur. The old dog seemed tired, her movements were slower than usual, her breaths heavier. She'd pushed herself beyond what anyone thought she could, and now her body was asking for rest. Kavi, Rudra, and Tanu never left her side. They had been wild creatures on paper, destined for eventual release. But after that night, no one could deny that they were something else entirely. Not pets, not zoo exhibits, but family. One of the board members had already begun drafting a recommendation to re-evaluate the release plan, especially considering the risks they now knew the nearby forest carried. But for Mira, there was no decision to make. "You can't separate them," she told Dr. Patel quietly. "Not now, not after everything." He didn't argue. In fact, he looked relieved. "I know," he said softly. "I've never seen anything like it." By noon, the story had begun to circulate beyond the sanctuary. A reporter from a local wildlife blog picked it up, then a national outlet called to confirm the details. Within days, it was on the front page of multiple news websites. Dog risks life to save. Tiger cubs, she raised, now fully grown. Predators return the favor. The comments poured in. People from around the world were moved by the loyalty of the old Labrador and the inexplicable gentleness of the 3 tigers. Donations spiked. Volunteers flooded the sanctuary's inbox. Everyone wanted to see Layla and her sons. But Mira kept the gates closed to the media. "This isn't a show," she said to the staff. "This is their home." Instead, she worked with a trusted videographer to document their story properly. A short film was released, a quiet, respectful retelling of their journey from the moment Layla was introduced to the orphaned cubs to the stormy night that changed everything. The footage of her walking alongside them, barking protectively, soaked in rain, became iconic. It was a moment frozen in time, and it lit a spark in people. Across the globe, animal welfare groups cited the story as proof of the emotional intelligence of animals. Schools used it in classroom discussions about loyalty, courage, and maternal instinct. Artists painted portraits of Layla. One sculptor from Canada even offered to donate a bronze statue of her to be placed at the sanctuary. But through it all, Layla remained the same. She didn't care about attention. She didn't need applause. All she wanted was to lie under her favorite tree, feel the breeze on her face, and keep her boys close. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, casting golden light across the enclosure, Mira sat with her notebook in hand. She was drafting a proposal to build a permanent habitat for the 4 of them, one that mimicked their natural surroundings but allowed them to live safely, together, without interference. Rudra stretched lazily beside her, his massive paw landing on Layla's back with surprising gentleness. Tanu yawned and curled into a ball beside the roots of the tree. Kavi, alert as always, kept watch. And Layla? She was sleeping, her body finally at peace. Mira watched them for a long time, and then she smiled. In the end, it hadn't mattered that Layla was a Labrador and they were tigers. Biology didn't matter. Classification didn't matter. Even nature's rules had bent in the face of something more powerful. Love. Not the kind written in textbooks, but the kind proven in the middle of a storm, when everything is on the line, and you still choose to protect the ones who depend on you. No matter the cost. No matter the odds. Weeks passed, and the world slowly turned its attention elsewhere. Viral stories came and went, but at the sanctuary time moved gently. Leaves shifted with the breeze. Birds sang their morning songs, and under the broad acacia tree in the center of the large enclosed habitat, a Labrador and her 3 tigers lived a life built on something the world rarely got to see: unconditional, unapologetic love. Layla's health began to decline, not suddenly, not painfully, but in that quiet way age creeps in, soft and inevitable. Her eyes, once sharp, grew cloudy. Her legs moved slower, but never once did she waver in her role. She still nudged Tanu when he slept too long, still barked when Kavi wandered too close to the outer fence, still licked Rudra's face clean when he returned muddy from the pond, much to his grumbling protest. The bond remained unbroken. Mira sat with them more often now, not with a clipboard or a camera, but simply as one of them. She would read books aloud, stories about loyalty, home, the wild. Sometimes the tigers would lounge lazily at her feet, while Layla lay curled up against her side, eyes half closed, ears twitching. It wasn't just companionship, it was trust. A sacred trust that had been earned through years of soft barks, protective growls, and sleepless nights under storms and stars. One evening, as the sun melted behind the horizon, turning the sky into fire, Layla didn't rise from her place beneath the tree. Mira, sensing something, approached quietly. The tigers stood around her, unusually still, not tense, just present, as if they knew this moment would come. Mira knelt beside her and rested a trembling hand on Layla's chest. Still, peaceful, gone. For a long time, no one moved. And then, one by one, each of the tigers lowered their heads. Kavi let out a soft chuff. Rudra pressed his nose to her shoulder. Tanu, the most sensitive of the 3, let out a low, sorrowful moan that rolled across the enclosure like a prayer. The next day, Layla was laid to rest beneath the tree she loved most. The entire sanctuary paused. Staff, volunteers, even a few community members who had followed her story came to pay their respects. Flowers lined the space. The local sculptor, who had once offered his work, installed a bronze statue just a few steps from her grave. Layla, standing tall, her gaze forward, her tail mid-wag. But what happened in the weeks that followed stunned everyone. The tigers, fully grown, strong, capable of roaming, refused to leave the area where she lay. They would walk the perimeter, but always return. Kavi often lay stretched out in front of the statue, guarding her memory. Tanu would curl up near her grave every night. Rudra, the boldest, began mimicking the way she used to bark, not a roar, but a short, sharp sound, as if calling her back. They didn't forget. They wouldn't. And neither did the world. Her story continued to be shared by teachers in classrooms, soldiers returning home, parents explaining love to their children. Because Layla had done something no one could have expected. She bridged a world between predator and protector, and in doing so reminded us all of the extraordinary power of selfless devotion. A love that didn't look like it should exist, but did. A bond that science might not explain, but the heart understands instantly. And for those who ever doubted that animals could feel, choose, grieve, and love, Layla proved otherwise. She didn't just save their lives. She gave them one worth living, and they, in turn, never let her legacy fade. So the next time you hear someone say, "It's just an animal," remember this story. Remember the Labrador who raised tigers. The mother who didn't care about species or stripes. She simply saw life in need and chose love. If this story moved you, give it a like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more powerful animal stories like this one. Sometimes love doesn't need to make sense, it just needs to be real.